It's time to strap on your skis, but you won't freeze. Cause in a moment we can show you all the ABCs of CSS. It's such a mess, sometimes you know. Let's learn while sliding on the snow. Cross country.
You're watching CSS Cross Country, and this is Level 1, Frost-Proof Fundamentals. In Level 1, we'll be discussing how to add CSS, our basic selectors, the cascade order, and the float property. Now, if this is a bit review for you, go ahead and skip ahead to the challenges. We're trying to make sure everyone's on the same page before moving to the more advanced materials. First, let's start with how we can add CSS to our application. Now, the easiest way to do this is via the inline style attribute in our HTML, and it's very easy to do, but it's a maintenance nightmare. Second is adding our styles via the document head, which also works, but if we have more than one page in our document, also a maintenance nightmare. So the main way to add your styles is via including them all in an external style sheet and having a link in the head of every page of your document. This is how we're going to treat all the styles in this course, so assume everything is on its own separate style sheet. Moving on, there are three basic selectors we're going to cover in CSS Cross Country, and these are the element, class, and ID selectors. There are a number of more selectors to deal with, but we're not going to cover them in depth in the course. If you'd like to learn more, visit link 1 below this video to learn more about things like the child and sibling selectors. So the first of these basic CSS selectors is the element selector. And just to review, that's directly mapping the HTML tag to your CSS declaration. We're also able to select items via the class attribute with a class selector. Finally, the ID selector allows us to select items via their ID attribute. We also have the ability to combine more than one of these selectors together to create a compound selector like this one. So let's talk about the cascade order. In CSS, there are two different cascades to contend with. The first being where the styles are found in your application. Now, in order of increasing priority, styles found in the external style sheet can be overridden by the same style set in the document head, can be overridden by the same style set in line, can be overridden by items marked important. We'll go into why important is a bad idea later in the course, but just know that since we're including everything as though it's in an external style sheet, we won't have to contend with things found in the head or in inline styles. So the second cascade we have to contend with is where the property is actually declared in our style sheet. In this case, we have two intro declarations setting colors. Via the cascade, the second color set will be the one that is applied to the element. It's important to remember that these properties are additive if they don't conflict. When things are shown to the user, everything is going to combine together. So if we have more than one declaration setting different properties, these will add together later on. So to round off Level 1, let's talk about the float property. Now you've probably used the float property at some point and seen something like this. In this case, we're going to go ahead and float our image to the left, and that's going to have the rest of the content wrap around that image. But what is this actually doing? Now when we float something, it's going to take that object out of the normal document flow and push it to the specified edge of its parent container. Any other sibling content in that container is going to wrap around our floated item. Now the float property allows us to define whether that item should be on the left or right, or if we want to remove a float, we can declare none. Floated items are going to stack up against one another until they reach a parent edge, at which point they'll break down to the next available edge. So in this case, if we have three containers floating up against one another, but the parent width becomes too small to contain all three, the final object is going to break down to a new line. You have to take care though when you have multiple things floating with different heights. In this case, since the first item's height is greater than that of the other two elements, when one of the other elements breaks to a new line, the first available edge is up against that first item, rather than all the way at the bottom. It's also important to consider that since we can float things left and right at the same time, The order in which they appear in the HTML is important to know which one will break to a new line if necessary. In this case, we have two images, one floating left and one floating right. If the parent container is too small to contain both of them on the same line, since the sled image appears second in our HTML, it's going to break down below the ski image should any collision happen. When multiple items are floated right and stacking up against one another, these items are going to float right to left. So the first item in your HTML will be the one that's found on the far right. So that does it for level 1. If you haven't already, please go ahead and download the slides on the sidebar. They're going to prove to be an invaluable resource for helping you move through the challenges. Also, please use the hints if you get stuck. We don't want you to get stuck on any one problem for too long. Good luck!